Hello, screenwriters, and welcome to Writing for Screens. Today's live episode, Ask Me Almost Anything, What is Screenplay Structure? My name is Glenn Gers, and I am the Chief Operating Everything here at Writing for Screens, a channel in which I am taking the skills, the tools, the insights that I had to figure out for myself in a 25-year career writing for TV and movies. On my way out of the business, I am leaving behind everything that I can in the form that I think is the most useful, which is just a collection of things for you to look at and try. That means that what I've done here, this is a little screen grab of my channel main page, and if you scroll down, you'll see a bunch of playlists. See them down there at the bottom? Here's a close-up. The first three of these playlists, as you scroll down, that's the Screenwriting Essentials, Screenwriting Tools, Skills, and Craft, and The Process, Being a Writer. Those three playlists contain a total of about 50 little videos, 10 minutes each, having a topic which is not just the title, it's also the thumbnail. Nice, bold colors, bright, bold. You can just scroll through and say, genre, flashbacks, character, dialogue. Let me see what he has to teach me about that. If you take those lessons, 50 of them, each one, stuff for you to try, figure out if it works for you. Some of it will, some of it works, some of it won't. There is no right way. There is no only way. There is no formula. Every artist has to make their own path. You have to figure out what works for you, what you want to do, what you can do. All I can do is say, here's a bunch of things I tried myself or I know other people tried. See if they work for you. That is where the gold is. So I urge you, please look at those three playlists. That is where everything I have to say is. Having done all that, I decided to do some live streams every Wednesday, if I can make it, at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time Zone. I talk about something for an hour and field questions from the chat. So that's what we're going to do today. And the topic, as I said, is about screenplay structure, because I got a question in the comments about that topic, and I have thoughts. First, I'm going to say a couple of quick hellos. Hello, Akari and Jens. And Pelicans, good to see all of you. Very nice to have you here. Let's get right into it. I don't want to take too long. I just do that little startup little speech in order to give people time to check in, say hello. Let's get to it. Let's get to what is screenplay structure. This question came from Blanche. Blanche C. wrote, "It seems that structure matters a lot, one could say the most, in screenwriting. Could you please elaborate on structure?" Great question, because I do believe you are right. The teaching of screenwriting, the screenwriting theory that is prevalent is very heavily structure based. And so what I want to do is talk about my understanding of how that works. I'm going to put the how-to stuff up front. Then, having done that, I'm going to tell you about some links to the videos that I've made that I think are most helpful. Those will be in the description below. And then I'm just going to rant for a bit about how the hell this structure mania came to be, because the history of screenwriting teaching is fascinating, and there's some stuff there I want to talk about. Some quick hellos. Hey, A-Link and Thomas Lewis. All right, let's get to it. Screenwriting structure. Here's the deal. Here's the secret. Here's what I'm going to tell you, which is there is no secret to structure. There is no secret plan that you just plug your stuff into once you've learned it. That is just not true. That is hogwash, malarkey. It's just a lie. The truth is that structure is simply scenes in order. That is the structure of scripts. That is all there is to I mean, when you really get down to the basic building blocks of scripts, it's scenes. And the order that they are in is the structure of the script, in the sense that when you start a movie, you are in a scene, and then you have another scene, another scene. So the the planning and organizing of those scenes is the structure. That's all there is to it. And people make this mythic thing out of it as if it's a mystery. It's not a mystery. It's just the scenes in order. Now, in order to make those scenes in order useful, the main thing that structure is telling the story. First, you need to know what your story is. You have to figure that out. And that is where I beg you to look at my videos on dramatic action and thinking in scenes. But the basic essence of structure is characters trying to do things, encountering obstacles, and taking actions to overcome them. That is structure. The structure is what happens in the story. There is no miracle secret organization which you should follow. There are lots of different possible structures you can follow. But the truth is, beyond the basics that it's scenes in order, you have to invent or craft each project structure according to its needs and your chosen models. Because the truth is, there are many possible structures. And in fact, you probably are going to need to do some stuff that only yours does, because only your story is your story. So the truth is, there is no single structure you are supposed to follow. There is no magical formula that you fit into and you just say, well, now I'm going to put my character in the scene where they hit the lowest point or the highest point, or there's a reveal or there's a twist. That could happen. That should probably happen sometimes in certain scripts, but there is no structure that you are supposed to fit into. You should be thinking about structure in terms of, how am I going to make this story work? Like just a very simple element of structure. If you have been following a certain character for a while and you have other characters, you need to cut away to those. You need to balance that. You need to weave the structure in among the different elements that are putting together that story. But there's no rule about how much you do one or the other. There's different movies that do it different ways. There's some that say, I'm going to stick to this one person and all the other people are going to be subordinate to them. There's others that say, I'm going to do an ensemble and make them all important. There's not a right or wrong structure. There just isn't. So the question is then, how do you do that? If you're like, that just leaves me with too many choices, too many possibilities. I will tell you the first secret. The main secret is to understand your structure, to understand any structure, you got to get out of the text and into the outline. And for those of you who don't want to do an outline, who hate outlines, who feel outlines ruin that, cool, that is okay. If you can somehow keep the story in your head and move the pieces of it, the scenes around in your head, great. If the way you do that is to first just write whatever you see and whatever you imagine, what you're doing is actually outlining in your head, but cool. The important thing is, great, having done that, if you need to make changes or something, it wouldn't be a bad idea to make an outline even after you've written your first draft. That's cool. The point of an outline is a list of scenes, and structure is scenes in the order that you are putting them in. So your outline is your structure. It's just that simple. There's no secret. It's just make an outline. In order to tell you why and how to make an outline, I've got those video description, the links in the description here, how to outline, why outline. Please look at those. Those are really good. Okay, so the other thing about how to do that is like, okay, and by the way, I really urge you to think in terms of your own work. There's lots of people who say, here, study this movie, study that movie, do this formula. And that's all okay. But the thing is, you have to know your story. You have to know your style, your way of thinking. And the most important thing, it's like saying, you need to learn chords to play music. Well, the best way to do that is not to follow someone else's chords, but to learn to play the chords yourself, to get familiar with the scenes, with the ordering of scenes, with what makes things move faster and slower. You're only going to be able to do that by playing with it yourself. You can study until the cows come home. Won't help you if you are not making your own work. That is the key. So therefore, make an outline. The other thing you should do is make outlines of movies you love or admire or hate, whatever it is. Like if you think The Prestige is really cool, well, that's a complicated structure. So you know what I would do? Take a copy, stream the Prestige on something where you can play pause. Hit pause after every scene. A scene is when they change, and please look at my video on thinking in scenes. But if it's finished at one location or one time, one event, and it moves to another one, hit pause. And then write down what happened in that scene in just one sentence, like Murray brought Cynthia the sandwich, or we saw how the trap works with the birds in The Prestige. Now, after a while, you're going to have a big, long list of, then he went to see her and he went to see their show. At the show, he tried to break their concentration. Whatever it is in the story, make an outline, a list of scenes. Doesn't have to be big or fancy. Just write down a list so you can look at it and go, oh, look, there's about this proportion before things go horribly wrong. And then there's this proportion where they're in this other place. And you sort of begin to get a feel about it. Do that a bunch of times. Look at a bunch of movies. Look at Jaws and Chinatown and whatever your latest favorite is. Barbarian. That's an interesting structure. The point is, make outlines or look at the storytelling of stuff you like. And then study every formula you can. There's tons of books where they say, okay, you have to have the inciting incident 30 pages in or 15 pages in, and then you have to have a low point or a twist at the midpoint or all this stuff. Those are great. Those are fine. Those are interesting. There's no reason that you shouldn't learn them. I'm not saying that they're evil. I'm saying they don't give you the answer for what you need to do. They just show you some basic possibilities. What they are basically saying is, in a lot of successful movies, this is the structure they had. Now, sometimes the reason that a lot of those things are following that structure is because these books and theories got passed around since the 1980s, and people are now following those books. It's not like those books were showing them some universal truth of structure that was already there. Those books were actually creating that plan and saying this plan will work. And the reason that plan will work is because they took apart fairly popular movies of the time and they said that's how it does. So what I'm saying is you should do the same thing. Make an outline. Look at the movies you like and see how they did it, because you might like one that doesn't follow that form. That might do different things, might spend more time in a different place or put the person's introduction later in. Who knows? There's lots of possibilities. So take what you like, use what you need from all of these theories, break them, bend them, mix and match. Take these theories and play with them, own them, use them as the tools that they are. That is my blessing to you, my how to do structure to you. Please look at these videos of mine, Think in Scenes, the 6 essential questions, why outline, and how to outline. Those are really, really the key. If you look at those, they should give you a lot of tips on the basics of structure, because the basics of structure, which I do kind of talk about in this, is you got a main character. They got something they're trying to do. They got some problem. And so they start to do stuff and then they try different things and it doesn't work. Now, exactly how that works, that's yours. That's yours to figure out. But at some point, they're going to need to do something that is going to end the story. That's your third act. In other words, all of these things are fairly natural. You do not need to follow some precise plan that says, at this point, they have to open the box and remove the secrets. It just, forget it. That's nonsense. Okay, the real point about structure is telling the story. You should be able to tell the story without the movie. Like if somebody just said, what's the story? You could say, we meet this guy. He's on a train. He's got 2 wristwatches. Why does he have 2 wristwatches? And then you meet someone else and he gives them one of them gives them the second wristwatch. And that's the story. That's the structure. Scene, scene, scene. And then what happens because of that? And what does that reveal to us? You're going to have to figure that out. There is no only rule of how you do it. People doing things, goals, obstacles, actions. That's it. So that is the lesson. There you go. 15 minutes, bing, bang, boom. I got it for you. Now I'm going to do some more quick hellos, and then I am going to quickly rant a little bit about how this structure mythology came to be. But first, let me say some quick hellos. Hey, Thumper. Hi, Michael. Hello, Lake Filter. George Roy Hill did a good job with Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five in terms of structure. Yes, and that's a cool, interesting point. The structure of Slaughterhouse-Five, like many stories, breaks up the time. In other words, the time in the book of Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, a brilliant, brilliant novel. And the very first sentence is, Billy Pilgrim had become unstuck in time. So therefore, our story is not going to proceed chronologically. Billy Pilgrim is bouncing around in time. The question is he bouncing around actually or just in his mind? Doesn't matter. In the story, we are popping him from one time zone to another, from one time in his life to another, because that's how he's experiencing it. And as we do that, we are revealing things which in the story were chronological. His life went in a certain order, and as we reveal them, we see the order of his life, even though we're not following it in order. It's great structure. Very, very good. Howdy from Texas. Oh, I hope that you are well in Texas. Imogen, great. Try and stay dry and warm and cool. Try and stay all of those things. So let's talk a little bit about the history of screenwriting structure. Sai has given me a question. From idea to screenplay, how to develop it? Should it be starting with a log line, and how? How will a first draft be looking like? Okay, I'm going to answer that in a minute, because that's a great question. Let me finish the topic I am on, which was how we got to this mythology about screenplay structure, and then I'm happy to talk to you. Okay, so Imogen, were you near the floods, or are you just saying because they were terrifying and terrible? There was some terrible flooding in the hill country of Texas, from what I understand. And I am glad that you are okay, Imogen. Okay, let's talk about the history of the screenplay structure. A lot of this comes from a 1979 book, an excellent book, a wonderful book, but not the greatest how-to book, honestly. Just a great book to get a sense of what 20th century screenwriting was about. William Goldman wrote, he made some great slogans, and one of his slogans is "Screenplays are structure." And he put that in capital letters, and he wrote it several times. Screenplays are structure. And this Adventures in the Screen Trade was one of the first screenwriting books of the modern era. There were a whole bunch in the 1920s, but really screenwriting how-to started with Adventures in the Screen Trade and Sid Field's book Screenplay. Those two books opened the doors, opened Pandora's box to screenplay writing how-to books. The thing about Screenplays Are Structure by William Goldman that people got way carried away about without understanding. Goldman was essentially talking to himself. Goldman was a novelist before he wrote screenplays. And his novel style, his novelistic style, his writing style was very, very heavily based in very long dialogue passages. In fact, he wrote a book that had so much dialogue that somebody in Hollywood thought it was a treatment for a screenplay. And that's how he ended up getting hired to do screenplays. There's a book called No Way to Treat a Lady, and it was just lots and lots of dialogue. Very conversational, very casual, great dialogue writing in which people were sort of getting at things off in a subtexty way. It's wonderful dialogue, but it does not fit movie making at all because it's way too long. The other thing that William Goldman used to do was he would write these amazing sort of stream of consciousness inside the character's head passages, sometimes 3 or 4 pages long. In the book Magic, he writes this monologue from this character's point of view about this experience watching a football game with his dad, I think. Anyway, the point is it's like 4 or 5 pages to tell this story, all through the character's experience of it. The point is long sort of casual dialogue and deep dives into a character's consciousness, they don't work in screenplays. And what happened was William Goldman was hired to write screenplays, which was exciting for him, but he didn't know how. So he stumbled on this concept. He suddenly thought to himself, if I'm not doing those things that I do, if there is no writing style, then what is a screenplay? And what he was saying was screenplays are structure, meaning screenplays are the events, the stuff that happens in the story. What I just was saying to you, in other words, the scenes. What is happening in the scene? What happens if they rip away all of your storytelling voice and you just have the stuff of the story? And he was trying to grasp how important that is, because for him it was all about voice. And now he was saying, no, I can't use my voice. I have to use structure. The other thing that he was reckoning with is the absolute agony of all screenwriters in Hollywood. Everyone changes your stuff. Like you might write it in a way that you just think is perfect. And then some producer comes along and says, oh, we can't use that car in that scene. Can you rewrite this and have it be a phone call that takes place in a phone booth at a train station? And like all of a sudden, like the whole point of the scene is changed. And you have to get used to that. And you have to say, okay, what is the action of this scene? That's why I came up with my ways of thinking in scenes and dramatic action and all that stuff. Because that is the basic structure of screenwriting is scenes. People doing something, and then you stop that scene and you go on to the next scene. And we learn different things as those scenes pile up and connect and affect each other. William Goldman was saying screenplays are structure to try and tell himself, forget about the voice and what will survive when they shred my writing. What will be left? And what's left is he goes into the bar and he orders a drink and he finds out where the villain is hiding. That's the scene. And that's what Goldman was trying to get into his own head. He was not actually saying that structure is more important, or especially was not saying there is a particular structure that you're supposed to use. He never said that. He never got anywhere near that. Sid Field did. Sid Field invented the 3-act structure. His book, Screenplay, was the one that set loose the paradigm. And this is a great book, by the way. I strongly recommend it. Sid Field, Screenplay. He's the one who laid out the basic idea of the 3-act structure. Not that this didn't exist in theater for a long time before, but the point was William Goldman was talking essentially to himself and talking about his own experience. And what happened was he triggered the wave of screenwriting books. And I just want to talk briefly about screenwriting books, because in the golden age of Hollywood, from the 1920s through the mid-1960s, okay, that was the studio era. And there were a lot of different theories about what made a story good. A lot of them were taken from literature or theater. And most of it was dialogue based. The main thing that you were trying to do in a golden age script was tell the story through conversations. And that was marvelous dialogue in some of those. However, the other thing that they were doing, because it was a visual experience, was spectacle. Great costumes, beautiful set design. Go out to Arabia and film Lawrence riding there. The visual spectacle. But the dialogue of Golden Age Hollywood and the spectacle of later Hollywood absolutely was not storytelling. you can you can have a great spectacle, you can have amazing costumes, you can have clever dialogue and no story, and it will fall flat. The 60s and the 70s added a new layer, which was all sorts of cinematic dazzle, tricks, snazzy editing, jump cuts, all kinds of stuff like that. They were starting to use zoom lenses and different kinds of lighting and film textures. They moved the camera. There were special effects. All of this stuff came about. Once again, none of it is storytelling. You can do that and have no story. And in the 60s and 70s, a lot of movies had very, very little story. So what happened? And by the way, I'm not saying that there were no good stories in 20th century screenwriting. There are some amazing pieces. The best work is foundational and gorgeous. But most work was counting on formula. What had been a hit? Let's imitate that. Get the people into the theater, keep the butts in the seats. That's all that they did. In the 1980s, when these screenwriting books started to be written, two things were happening. First, the rise of the American film school. There had been no film schools until the 1960s, at which point USC, UCLA, NYU, Columbia were the main film programs in which people were taking film seriously as a theory, as a thing you could teach and learn. It's like scholarship, but it's about movies. How cool could that be? So that was one thing that was happening. The other thing that was happening was big corporations like Coca-Cola and Gulf and Western bought all the movie studios. Every single major movie studio got bought by a big corporation. And at the time, in the 1970s and 80s, there was a thing starting called the MBA, the Master of Business Administration, another form of education that had not existed until then. There were people doing business theory, but the whole idea of these graduate schools where they were teaching how to run businesses, that all happened at the same time as the film schools. So what you've got here is this concept of essentially optimization. We now call it that, but the MBA started this concept. Actually, in the 1920s, there was a whole thing about efficiency. But the basic idea is that they started to apply optimization and some kind of business program to screenplays, because these products there had to be some reason that you invested millions of dollars in a movie. And aside from having a movie star, or having some representation of something else that had succeeded previously, like if Sound of Music was a big hit, all of a sudden they made a lot of musicals. What they were doing was trying to say, what's the formula? What's the system by which we can make successful movies? And that created this genre of how-to books for screenwriting. People began to believe that there was a secret structure. In other words, that all of these different pieces of work followed the same form. This is not true. But because of the success of Sid Field, and then later Robert McKee and Vogler and a bunch of other different people, we have all these people saying, I am going to analyze the structure of successful movies, and I'm going to figure out what they have in common, and that is going to be the formula. That does not work. It's great to learn it. You should definitely study every formula that you can. You should read all of these books and listen to all those videos and then see what they say. Like if they say you need to make sure to save the cat, sure, try saving the cat. However, just remember that there are some great movies where they don't save the cat, or where the character doesn't enter for a while, or where the character dies off in the middle, and they break the formula. And that is very important for you to know. So my point is, while it is absolutely delightful that all these people came up with this whole industry in which they are trying to create a formula which you can put your work into, that is not good writing. That is not good art. It is good to know those formula. It is good to know the forms. It is then important that you decide what you like and you study what you like and figure out what your version is of the things that you like. That's it. Screenplays are structure in the sense that buildings are architecture or cooking is ingredients. Those are things that are part of it. You definitely need ingredients to do cooking, but you also need other things. You need tradition, and you need process, and you need all sorts of different ideas about spices and flavors and who knows what. The way you cook, I don't know that much about cooking. But my point is, screenplays are structure. They are also character. They are also dialogue. They are also style. They are also mythology and philosophy. Screenplays are a lot of stuff. They are storytelling, and you need to decide what kind of story you want to tell and how you want to tell it. And the more that you can learn about the different ways to tell it, the more you can choose between those tools to make your story. And that is the answer. Okay, let's get back to these fabulous comments. Okay, first of all, we're checking in with Imogen, who is in Travis County. I am so sorry. That is very, very and Imogen also says, screenwriting is not for the faint of heart. It is kicking my ass right now. Well, let me know why if you have a chance. But the main thing about it is the whole trick about screenwriting is it's an elaborate and weird thing to do. So therefore, the main thing you should remember is if screenwriting is kicking your ass, that's because you have to write a bunch of screenplays. You have to write a bunch of scripts. You're not going to solve it all at once. But once you get used to the form, then you can start to get your talent in there. Until you get used to the form, it's like if you have a mech suit, if you have like all this armored robotic stuff on you, it's powerful, but until you know how to operate it, it's just getting in the way. You need to practice. You need to do some test runs. You need to try some missions, and then you find out what you're going to do that you do. Anyway, Alec Webb says, I just got Anatomy of Genre, the follow-up to Story. Is that I thought that Story was McKee, and is that a McKee book? Because there's an Anatomy of Genre, I think, is a Truby book. Each one has wonderful insights, great stuff, but their formula doesn't always work. And it's important that you learn those formulas if you want, but you do not need to follow them. You can follow. You can just say, I'm going to go. It's like, I'm going to work at writing poetry. I'm going to work in sonnets. Okay, there's rules for sonnets. Somebody came up with a formula for, I think it's 16 lines and a certain rhythmic scale and a certain rhyme scheme. That's what you're going to do. Cool. If you want to do that with screenwriting and write the sonnet screenwriting, write the Truby or the McKee or whatever it is, that's fine. All I can say is, if your story isn't fitting into that, don't be afraid to break it. Okay. Thank you, Anshul, for my weekly shirt review. I appreciate it. Anshul, have you ever seen me in a shirt you didn't like? Okay. Skepular says, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, anarchists, anarchists of creativity, say that you connect story beats with therefore, but, so, however, because. To give structure, and you avoid and. That's actually a very good note. That's very cool. Yeah, in other words, that things have consequences and that a scene is related to another scene in terms of how it affects the other scene. Absolutely. It's a very good way to put it. If you look at a scene and another scene and you put between it therefore or but or so, in other words, he's got the diamond, but there is an armed guard between him and the door. Cool. That's good stuff. Yeah. Imogen says, my teacher is using Linda Seeger's book as our lessons right now. Yeah, I don't know that, but absolutely, why not? Anshul says, please like the video. I cannot help but agree. Michael says, I have a friend who lives in Morocco. He said the art was made up of complex patterns. It didn't follow any particular logic. I think people are flexible. Michael, I agree. And yes, that is my point. It is possible to do a movie which is about cycles and that there isn't a progress. There's a series of cyclical events. That would be a really cool movie with a really powerful vision. It would infuriate all the people who say you have to follow these paradigms, but it would work. And that's really cool. Thank you. Eliminating voice from persuasive writing makes it stronger. Skepular says, I cannot agree with that. First of all, I don't think you can eliminate voice. I mean, if you were to choose, for instance, a very plain voice, that's still a voice. So I'm not sure that you can eliminate a voice. Everything you do is a creative choice. What you can choose to do is join a certain tradition and follow a certain pattern or formula and say that's the voice, but it's still a voice. Okay. Thomas Lewis says, sadly, every Pixar movie follows exactly the same formula. Check, please. Does it? To a certain extent, but I would have to think about that. First of all, I haven't seen everyone. I haven't seen Coco, and I've heard it's terrific. They do tend to follow certain basic, classic, late 20th century Sid Fieldy, Robert McKee forms, but they're also very, very inventive within it. I would have to think about that, but yes, any company, any group, they do tend to find their groove and stay with it. It is the rare artist who's like David Bowie or something, who's just like constantly reinventing themselves. Some filmmakers do that, a lot don't. Anshul says, I personally feel I saw so many movies, theater and performing arts, and being myself in performing since as young as 3, I feel I write with instinct. That is totally cool. It is totally fine to write from your instinct. What's happening there is you've simply absorbed a lot of tools, a lot of formulae, a lot of things that you've made your preferences known to yourself. So you're just unconsciously checking with that rule and going from it. And if you can do that, it's great. I only offer advice when somebody's plan is not working. If you have a working plan, including instinct or writing blind or writing whatever it is, or following a formula, if it's working, if you are productive, if you are making work that you like, don't stop that and don't do what I say. Do what works for you. LZ Skydog says, why do you write stories? Before the characters, what is there? What feeling pushes you? This is interesting. Pushes you to write, or what do you think about? When you write, what are you aiming for? Thank you very much. Okay, hang on. I'm going to get to that LZ Skydog, but I just remembered. I blew off Psy. I have to come back to Psy and get to the idea of from the idea to screenplay, how to develop it. Should it be starting with a log line or how? And what will a first draft be looking like? Okay, these are giant questions, and I'm going to ask you to check out, because I've gone into great detail here on the main page of my channel. When you're done with this live stream, which could be any second now, go to my channel, the first 3 playlists, Screenwriting Essentials, Screenwriting Tools, Skills, and Craft, and The Process, Being a Writer. I go into great detail about exactly how to do that. I'm going to give you a quick summary now, but I beg you to watch those videos. They're short. They're just 10 minutes long. Okay, but how do you develop from a screenplay? The answer is every single project and every single person will be different. It doesn't matter where you start, because wherever you start, like suppose you start with character and you're like, I want to write about this type of character or this particular character. Then you're going to say, well, what is the story going to be about? In other words, if you start with character, you're going to be, what story will help me to reveal what I value or despise in this type of character, in this particular character? So if you start with that, but suppose you start with, I want to write a war movie and I want to say that war is good. I don't love that, but I get it. And so therefore you would then start with, well, how can I show that? And you would invent characters. So whatever piece you are starting with, you then work towards the others. It doesn't matter which one you do. Every single project will come from a different point. The log line is simply a quick summary. Log line is just a way of saying, if you had to tell me the story in one sentence, how would you do that? In 2 sentences. The log line has to define who the main character is, what their problem or goal is, and what world they are in, what genre. And so that stuff, I actually did a whole Ask Me Anything about log lines. So I urge you to watch that to get more about that. But the answer is, you can't really start with the log line. You have to start with your story, with your characters. And then at a certain point, as you're working on it, if you had to explain to someone why they want to watch that, that's what a log line is. A log line is just like the back cover of a book or the thumbnail on a streaming service. It's just, how can you get across what this is about in a very, very short, direct way without giving away the ending? So a log line won't help you about the ending. So that's a thought about that. Okay. If you wouldn't mind, we're probably going to have to stop the comments. Well, maybe not. Let's see. Okay. So let's get back to LZ Skydog. Why do you write stories? Before the characters, what is there? Well, that's interesting because I'm not sure whether or not there is something before the characters. Different projects will start differently. Why do I write stories? I write stories because I love to read and watch stories. That's it. It simply came from the fact that when I was a kid, I was a very frightened, anxious, vulnerable person. Life terrified me. And one of the few things that made me feel better, that comforted me or made me feel like there was some order or some safety in life, was books and movies and plays, stories. Also, frankly, visual art. I love paintings and drawings. I also love music. I'm just not good at those, and I haven't put a lot of work into those. But storytelling, for some reason, for me personally, connected in that if I was I went to summer camp and it was a sleepaway camp, and I was a kid and I could not sleep. I was just too freaking upset and homesick and scared. And they said, well, you got to stay. So what can we do to get you through the night? And literally the answer was, let me read a book with a flashlight. So that's where storytelling comes from for me, is that I find comfort and a weird click inside my soul that makes me like to watch stories. And I just liked, it took me a long time to get competent at it, but I always said, well, I'd like to make up my own. That's it. That's why I tell stories. The feeling that pushes me to write is that I get comfort. It is literally medicine for me. Not for everybody. Other people do it because they want to get attention or fame or money, which are, by the way, very, very risky reasons to write. The thing about my reason is, even if everybody hates it, it still works. It still serves its purpose. If you're trying to write about for money and you can't get through to the money people, kind of a waste of time. So I believe that when you write, the first thing I am aiming for is to entertain and move and please my inner audience, myself. In other words, I am thinking, gosh, I wish that somebody else had written this book or this movie, but since they haven't, how would I do it? Like, I get an idea, like, oh, it would be really cool to do a story about someone who loses their memory. Or one thing I wrote was about a person with schizophrenia who witnesses a murder. They hear a murder, but schizophrenics very often have auditory hallucinations. So therefore, it became a question of what would happen to a person who was witnessing a murder and they were mentally ill. And then I spent a year or so figuring out that story and adding other characters and who's the bad guy and what's it. But it all came from just this idea. What if? That's often the case. Sometimes I will just want to try to work in a genre that I have enjoyed. I'll be like, ooh, I would love to do a film noir. And then something will click that adds into that. Like I wanted to do a relationship movie, a small independent film that was about relationships. And then, as I've said, I saw a couple of overweight people walking on the beach one day. They were walking for exercise, like walk buddies. And I thought, what's that relationship like? And then I sort of slotted that into that ambition to do a little character movie that I could make myself. So the point is, I had a genre in that case, and then I had just a flash of an insight about a relationship, and I put those two things together. Usually what happens is you have some craft-related ambition or desire, like, oh, I'd like to do a scary story. Oh, I'd like to do a funny thing. Or, oh, I really loved this particular movie. I kind of want to do my own version of that. You have that. And then you have just the things in your life that come at you, and one of them will click into that place, and then you've got it. So the answer is, I write because I need stories in my life to get through the day. I mean, I really like when I need to calm down or feel better because something bad happened, I will read a book or watch a movie. And for some reason, that's medicine to me, literally. It also becomes sort of a drug in that I can't stop doing it. The craft came afterwards. In other words, it's like saying you want to swim. Well, then you have to learn how to physically swim, and it takes a while to learn the technique of swimming and to practice it. But that first instinct is, I want to be in the water. Does that help, LZ Style? Does that make sense? When you write, what are you aiming for? Depending on the nature of the project, like if I'm always aiming for some kind of emotional connection to life as I see it, to people. I don't do great connecting to people in real life, but I connect really well through art. And so therefore, I'm always connecting, and it's like having a social life. That's really the truth. I do storytelling because it's my best version of a social life. So there you go. Okay. Anshul says, instinct grown from all my experience with consuming art and forms and creating art forms. Script books only teach me I am right, correct, or they are different experiences for you. Yes, I completely agree. Hi, Wolf Powers. Yes, Anshul, I agree. We're very similar in that way. Instinct is your right way. Very good. Okay, Thumper says, I have a great subject for a story. It has a conflict and a central mystery, but I don't know how to tell it. Maybe looking at formulas is a good way in, at least to start. Absolutely. I completely agree. First, I would say, look at the movies like it, or stories, books, whatever it is, Thumper, that whatever genre or style you feel it, like your instinct is, oh, this would be like that. Because very rarely do we think of a story and have nothing that we've ever seen that was like it. So the first thing I would do is say, whatever you have a central mystery, make a list of 20 movies that have good mysteries that you love, and then watch them and analyze them. And I really mean analyze them. I did a whole video about this called Take Art Apart. And I would suggest that you do that, which means, like I was saying, make an outline of the ones that you like, but also definitely read or watch videos analyzing mysteries. And then, yeah, if you have the thing about all of this is it should click for you. When LZ was asking me, like, why do I write? Because it clicked. Because when I started to read a book or watch a movie, there was this cosmic, psychological, emotional connection to that art form. Whereas poetry just doesn't do it for me. I can appreciate it, I can intellectually understand it, but I don't feel it in that deep, I understand this, I can do this way. When you hear about musicians, like first hearing the type of music they love or seeing the first theater that they did, if you're a theater artist, there are these moments where things connect. So I would say for you, Thumper, what is connecting for you about mysteries? And then look at those mysteries. And if you find a book, if you find McKee or Vogler or even, Save the Cat, if you read it and you think, oh, this is helping me, then do that. That's great. I'm not saying don't use them. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm saying they don't solve every problem and you are not required to use them. Because people will start to say, oh, Linda Seeger, if you don't follow her book, you're going to fail. That's what I'm trying to dispel. You can succeed without ever reading a screenwriting book. Probably can't succeed without ever watching a movie. But maybe, I don't know. The main thing is none of these formula is the secret to success. None of them got it right. They're just one way to do it. And that's my suggestion. But starting with a formula, absolutely. I've done that a lot. Michael Arndt, A-R-N-D-T. Let me see if I still have his thing. Yeah, here it is. Michael Arndt did a video, which it was about endings, he said, but it was a 2-hour video analyzing films and breaking them down. It's brilliant. It is completely a great formula for how to structure a script. He keeps saying it's not a formula, but it is. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's a really good formula. It's just not the only formula. Okay, Michael says, I usually write a 40-page draft with no outline. Then I search for a story within that. The next draft, the story becomes clearer. Sometimes it takes many drafts to nail the story down. Absolutely perfect plan if you like doing that. If you feel comfortable doing that, that is great. I am definitely not working like that, but I definitely can see how that would be cool. You sort of explore and then you look at it and things appear to you that you didn't consciously know. And you're like, oh, that's who this character is. He's a liar, or he's a hero in the guise of something else. Whatever it is that you're finding in your own work, sometimes a great way to find it is to get something out there. Absolutely. Norma says, sometimes a tree or an animal can be a kind of character too. Absolutely true. Certainly in animation, but in any kind of storytelling, yes. Yeah. What we are doing there is what they call anthropomorphizing. In other words, you're taking human characteristics and saying, what would it be like to be if that tree was a grouchy person or whatever. Now and then you'll get work where they're trying to get into the mind of a thing totally alien to people. The problem is movies aren't really great at that. It's actually better in books or something. But it's not impossible. Okay, thank you, Anshul. We're talking about shirts. Okay, your videos have been my lifeline this past year. Yay, thank you, Imogen. I feel like I very much agree with your perspective and approach to storytelling. I appreciate your contribution to the development of our craft. You are more than welcome. Thank you so much. That is very, very kind of you. The biggest thing I'm trying to do is to turn you back to doing. The most important thing that you can do as an artist is do the art, do the stuff, do the work. Then every other thing you do is great. If you want to study a formula, if you want to join a religion, whatever it is, do it. That's fine. I'm just saying do the work every day if possible, even just a little bit, even just a couple of sentences. That's the key. Don't look outside of yourself for the ultimate answer. Look outside of yourself for tools and models and inspiration, but then turn it back to yourself and your work. Okay. Akari says, Thanks for sharing your method, Michael. May I ask if your drafts, including the first 40-page one, are done in screenwriting format or freeform first? Oh, that's cool. And Michael says screenplay format. Ah, interesting. Michael says, I'm not a writer. I use screenwriting as a format for storytelling. Absolutely valid. That is super, super cool. Okay, getting ready to say goodbye. So the outline for my next project, says Lake Filter, already feels overwritten, but it's still incomplete. I feel so lazy to finish it. Should I? Here's the thing. Sometimes, yes, you get too stuck in an outline and it's better to just say, okay, I'm ready to write. But if you haven't finished it in the sense that you don't know your ending, you may get frustrated later on. But what I would say is if you're getting frustrated with your outlining and you feel like it's just too much, yeah, stop and write a draft of what you've got so far and invent what you can. If you get stuck, if you get lost, go back to the outline for a while and then go back to the writing. It's fine. There's no law that says you have to outline and then write and they're separate. You could go back and forth every other day. There's no rules. Do what works for you. If you've overwritten your outline and you're just bored of it and you want to do some screenwriting, do that. When you get jammed up on that, go back to the outline. Just keep moving. Okay. Take art apart. I do it too much. I don't mean take your art apart. Take art apart is about how I'm saying one great way to learn is to take art that you like, especially storytelling, and learn how it's built. Which means like if you were making a car and you only saw the outside of cars, you saw a car driving by and you're like, damn, I want to make cars. You would never be able to figure out how that car operates unless you took one apart and said, oh, those wheels have this big thing in between them that is turning them. That's what I mean by take art apart, is like look at a movie that you love and literally break down how many scenes is it? Where do the characters come in? Where do the changes happen? How is the dialogue structured? That's what I mean by take art apart. Imogen says formula does not equate to the heart of the story and the character depth. That's correct. And the problem with formula is that it is a shell. It is a shape. It is a framework. You've got to bring to formula your elements, and that will change the formula sometimes, and that's okay. What if someone rewrites a great obscure show to take place in space, keeping all the emotional dynamics but transforming it? That is a good question, because the answer is if you are rewriting a great show in such a way that the elements are so transformed as to be new, that's great. Absolutely legitimate to do. If you are taking things like if you said, I love some obscure show and I'm going to basically copy things from it in such a way that they are identifiable, you are committing a crime. You are committing copyright infringement, and you should not do that. So like you definitely should change it. Like famously, okay, there's a book called Mutiny on the Bounty. It got turned into a movie several times. At some point, some guy who was working on Westerns said, or a famous screenwriter said, you know, you could take the story of Mutiny on the Bounty, but put it in the West. And instead of a ship, it's a cattle drive. And that became the movie Red River. Red River is Mutiny on the Bounty transformed. There's no copyright infringement problem. It's fine. What the guy who did Red Rivers did was he rethought and rediscovered and invented from the basics of that. So yes, if you want to do a show and you absolutely love some show like Mary Tyler Moore Show, which is not obscure, but so it's this great sitcom about this woman in this workplace and there's these different characters, you could do that. If you were to say there's the grouchy boss and his name was Lou Grant, you can't do that. You could have a grouchy boss. The problem is that the grouchy boss has sort of become a cliche, but if you want to use that, you have to think, what's your version of the grouchy boss? So that my answer is, if you are rewriting in the sense that you are adapting, you are creating from the basis of something, and you are not using any element, including a plot device or a character or anything about it, that is so distinctly identifiable or unique that you are stealing it, then yes, you can do that. Okie dokie. Yeah. Okay, Lake Filter says, thanks. May happiness and good health be with you always. I agree with that, Lake Filter. Have a good write. As we all know, go write something. Yes, A Link says, thank you. An hour only feels short when watching Glenn's stream and writing. Thank you, Lake Filter. Well, wow, we are exactly at the 1 hour point, and I am going to exactly say so long. I'm going to say see you next week. I'm going to say, please do your stuff. Go write something.